Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurum militam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam karoti vachalam Pangolangayate girim Yatkripatamaam vande Shri Guru Dinatarine Ajanulambita bhujo Kanakavadato Sankirtanaya kapitaro Kamalaya taksho Vishwambaro Dvijavaro Yugadharma palo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunavataro Angashamalim Shatabirabito Mandi Kritendivaram Jagam Jagurarocisam Vidadatam Pattam Varasya Shriyam Vrindaranya Vilasinam Hridilasatama Radhaskandhaniveshito Jwalabhujam Dayandamodaram Shamasundara Shikanda Shekara Smerahasya Murali Manohara Radhikara Sikamam Kripanidhe Swapriya Charana Kinkarim Kuru Tavaivasmi Na jivami toya vina iti vigyaya radhetum nayamam charanantike hoya chena hoya vena prabhu jatadas sabara charana vanda dante korigas vancha kalpataru vyascha kripa sindhu vyahe vacha Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Before starting, I offer my respectful obeisances unto my Guru, Om Vishnu Parasto Taraset, Shri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj, by whose mercy I have a little bit of inspiration to stay here and understand a little something about the nature of the divine and advance in spiritual life. Really, in the Indian culture tradition, everything is given from teacher to disciple. You can study, like we were discussing earlier, as much as you want, doesn't mean anything, right? But relationship is what matters, which is going to be the subject of class today. In India, they have some things which are called lineages or sampradayas, right, where there's a guru to disciple, guru to disciple, guru to disciple, and there's different schools of thought. They get very philosophical, talking about what is the nature of jad, which means physical matter, physical reality, earth, water, fire, air, ether. What is the nature of the atma? What is the nature of the soul? Who are we? What is our true identity? What's the chemical composition of the soul? What's the dharma, the purpose of the soul and of who we are? They get into what is the nature of the divine. But what interests us most, and is the essence of all Vedic knowledge, is what is the relationship between us and the divine. What is that relationship? And this relationship is called sambandha. It's also called rasa. And without it, everything is boring. Without it, everything is just an intellectual exercise, or it's just another cycling of the same old, excuse my language, but crap in the material world. This world that we're just looking, how can we eat better? How can we sleep better? How can we mate better? How can we defend what we have, protect ourselves from other things? And there's animalistic life in this world of just fearing, eating, sleeping, fighting, making some money. Purpose to it is, there's some beauty, there's some purpose to it, and we can get into that philosophically. But if it's the exact same thing that a caterpillar is doing, or that a worm is doing, or that a microbe is doing, or a virus, I don't know if viruses are alive. Now that's a subject, right? Bacteria, right? Then the Vedic wisdom tells us that there's something more to the fact that makes us conscious beings. Because eating, sleeping, mating, defending, fearing, that's not something which
you can apply conscious action to that, and then that can become a process of yoga or a process of spirituality. Like if you talk about like yoga, stretching, what does that have to do with spiritual growth? Is now you're bringing consciousness, you're bringing intentionality and purpose behind a mundane physical action. So it's a little bit more, quote unquote, enlightened, or it can be uplifting to our being. But if we do, just running away from a tiger eating you is nothing enlightened about that. Fearing and reacting without any conscious purpose is our bondage. It's what we might talk about in today's class about Maya, or illusion, or binding, what keeps us in this world. And the whole point of spiritual life is to step outside of simple instinctual impulses, to step outside of mundane conditioning into something which is greater. And what is that thing that is greater? That is spiritual life. What is that thing? Relationship. Sambandha. They say there's the lover, the beloved, and then the relationship between them. And that sambandha, or that relationship, is what spiritual growth is. They say Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabunai. I keep on quoting the ancient Vedic scriptures and different things. If I go off into another language, I'll explain it. Don't worry. It's because I didn't make it up, right? But it says that this propensity to love is inherently inbuilt inside of the soul. This thing it's inseparable from us. It's like Agni Jwalakai Kabunahibe. Just like fire and flames cannot be separated. Agni, fire and heat are intertwined as one thing. In the same way, love, relationship, purpose is like integrated. It is us. Like some will say, God is love. Love is God, right? This love, this relationship. But how can we understand or define that thing? How can that relationship be beyond material matter? How can it not be something else? It requires an understanding of first, who is the lover, who is the beloved, and what is the nature of that relationship. And that's what Vigyan is. So that's what knowledge is. So first thing is the science of self-realization, knowing who we are, what is our identity. And again, I gave a whole 1-hour class on this like 2 weeks ago here on identity. But if we're to encapsulate it, we can understand identity partially by understanding what it's not, and then understanding what it is. So Judd, in the beginning, material matter, is not us, right? That's not identity. That's just a transformation of 5 elements: earth, physical matter, water, a little bit more subtle, fire, air, ether, just mixed in different compositions. So if we look at inert matter, like this thread that I'm holding here, or this string here, it's got some earth qualities in it. It's got some water. If you rub it, there's some fire, there's some heat in it. There's also air inside. It's just a make of this 5 elements. But if we leave it here long enough, it will disintegrate, it will go into the earth, it will grow as a tree, and then that tree will be a fruit, then someone will eat the fruit, and then it'll turn into your fingernail, and then that will turn into poop, and then that will go into the ocean, and then that will turn into a fish, and then there's just energy is, like I said, can never be created or destroyed. It's just in a continual interchanging of matter, right? So from that perspective, then a rock, a tree, a talcum powder, container is just inert matter. But us as a living entity by nature is not that. So then what are we, right? Then you would say, well, we are chit, right? We are consciousness. We are that which can be aware of matter, that which is identifying with this body. Though this body is a machine, a vehicle, that's not us. We're something which is a consciousness, right? So then you can say, well, what is that? I can understand, I can take a sample of some sand and stick it in a test tube, but how do I understand consciousness? How do you contain or confine consciousness? Where is it? How do you measure it? And that becomes a lot more difficult, right? So a lot of people on the spiritual path, and a lot of spiritual philosophies in a good way, in the pursuit of understanding what is not matter, goes to what I describe in my book as another subtle form of matter, or the mystical realm of mind, which is emotions, or of intelligence, or of identity, or of belief systems, or there can be the ethereal sphere where there's different people talk with ghosts or spirits, or there's this, maybe some people take a drug experience or go into some deep meditation and experience another plane of existence which is not as easily measurable as earth, water, fire, air. They might get into like Shaolin Kung Fu and have like unbendable arms and chi and prana and yoga. And then this can commonly be understood as, oh, now I've understand what spiritual is. That's what spirit is. It's something which is non-physical. But the ancient Vedas tell us that this is just a subtler form of physicality. It's still material nature in a certain way. Let's say information, an idea. Like in my book, I talk about the 8 elements, the elemental reality system. How there's earth, water, fire, air, ether are the physical elements. Then the more subtle elements is mind, intelligence, and false ego. We talk about each one in detail, but let's talk about the idea of intelligence, which is very hard to measure, right? But intelligence also exists in this thread that I picked up. This also has intelligence. It has, well, maybe it doesn't have a DNA, but it has information to it. It's white, right? It has certain qualities. It's flexible. There's certain information that defines it, what it is, and it is part of it. Yet this thread is still not consciousness. Some people would argue that it is, and we'll get there later for other points of view, right? But still, so there's subtle reality, which is not physical reality, is still a conditioned reality. It's still a movement of energy in this world. Like a lot of people who get into yoga about like the breathing exercise, or maybe you've seen like the Shaolins and all this movement of energy, apparently like magic in a lot of sense. It's just as I was describing, when you eat a leaf, then that becomes part of your fingernail and becomes part of your body, then comes out as poop, and it's just an interchanging of energy. Also information, also emotions, also prana, chi, the subtle energy is also just another transformation that if you subtly tune yourself to, then you can do things that seem like magic, but it's just a manipulation of material energy, right? So the ancient Vedas tell us that this is still all not consciousness. This is still all materiality, right? Something which is temporary by nature and in transformation. But Jiva Bhuta Mahabaho Daitem Dharyate Jagat, like maybe you've heard of the Gita, Bhagavad Gita. It says that there's another energy which exists beyond Prakriti or matter or material energy, and that's called the Jiva. That's called the Atma. That's who we are, right? That's the soul. And that Atma is composed of Sat Chit Ananda, or is composed of eternal existence. By nature, it's not going to come into being and then, then be destroyed, right? Like in the Gita again, it cannot be cut to pieces by any weapon, burned by fire, moistened by water, withered by the wind. It's not transformable. It's not changeable by anything. Just as the leaf becomes poop, the soul doesn't turn into something else. The soul is a constant existence, regardless of the ever-changing nature of reality, regardless of whether there's a tidal wave and destroys the society or what. It's an eternal, persistent existence, right? Also, the soul, beyond that, is chit, or is consciousness, or is the awareness of the elements. So if you say the body is kind of like a machine, right? But who is that is aware of the machine? That is the soul. That's consciousness. You can be aware of your thoughts and mind. So that means the mind is not you. You can be aware of your beliefs or identity. Very powerful to shift your beliefs and identity. I spend time in my personal development to kind of craft what is my identities that I've created. What identities do I want to create, and then move the elements to move into that thing. It's still not a solid part of who we are. Sometimes there's something which is called avipargyo smriter, where we identify so much with the elements that we think that they're us. Consciousness prevails the body. We think that I'm this ethnicity, or I'm this color, or this thing. We take on identification, like if you took a fire or took a piece of metal and stuck it in fire, and then you take it out, it takes on all the qualities and it's permeated and it seems like it's fire, but it's not fire, it's a different element. So we can identify and think that this is us, but that's Maya, that's illusion, delusion, and that's, with that identification comes suffering. With that identification comes all the problems that have in our life, because it's not reality. It's not truth. It's something which is secondary, something which is unreal, And therefore, by identifying with that thing which is unreal, natural, inevitable consequence is suffering and pain. And you could say spiritual life is all about finding truth, but knowing it, experiencing it, living it, letting that be real. So we say the soul, again, not physical reality, not subtle reality, but it is existence, like we described, persistent. It's consciousness, that which identifies with things. And then this is the best part, which I want to talk about, is it is ananda, or it is bliss. It is pleasure. It is joy. It doesn't exist just for the sake of existing. It's not just aware for the sake of being awareness, even though many spiritual paths will lead you to believe so. And they're not wrong, because that's one aspect of the soul or the self. That's why Buddhist paths, a lot of mainstream spirituality nowadays is all about, okay, how do I be present? How do I be aware? How can I exist simply in my consciousness and observe what's going on? And by observing it and understanding that I'm not my trouble, I'm not my pain body, I'm not my physical body, then that gives us a natural mukti, or a natural liberation, a natural relief from the suffering of a misidentification with the self. And this is good. This is essential. In the Gita, this is called Brahma Bhuta, or to be situated in Brahma, or situated in the self as eternal knowledge, or as eternal truth. Very high spiritual state. You can say this is nirvana, this is enlightenment. But we're missing 1/3. But that 1/3 is the most important 1/3 that makes the other ones just, how do you say, just an accent, or just an embellishment to the main core essence of Ananda. And what Ananda is joy, is happiness, it's bliss, it's juice. Sometimes it's described as rasa, juice, essential nectar, is bliss. And the soul by nature is always craving that which is beautiful, always craving that which it brings bliss, that which brings happiness, that which brings sweetness. And that's the if there's none of that, then there's no existence. And that's why many spiritual paths will say, oh, there's like the candles, you turn the candle out, and then now you don't exist, and all the pain goes away. It's true, there's no pain, but there's also no fun, right? There's also the pleasure side of things is missing. So in this world, when we're in a conditioned state, when we're not fully enlightened, we're searching for, how can I live forever? We think we're going to live forever. There was one story of a great king. He was walking in the jungle, and a yaksha, which is kind of like a magical, mystical creature, appeared to him and said, "You shall not pass," kind of like, you can't pass unless you can answer my riddles or my questions. And then one question was, "Kimashtarjam," what's the most amazing thing in reality? And the answer the king gave, who was a very enlightened king, he said the most amazing thing is that all around us, we see everyone is dying all of the time. Anyone in history who's been around for more than 100 and something years is dead, right? It's 100% success rate of death. All of our ancestors, all of people that we know, I have friends who've died, right? And there's death everywhere. If you go to the funeral place, it's never out of business. There's always, people coming. But we think, not going to happen to me. Won't happen to me. It's the most amazing thing, the most amazing type of delusion that we can have. But why? This delusion, in a sense, it's perverted in that way, but it comes from the need of the self to exist on forever. The constitutional nature of the soul is always wanting to exist, right? It's a drive. In the same way, the drive, but it's looking in the wrong way to try to have the vehicle that we're identifying with, which is not us, live on. But in the same way, the soul is driving for it's like like someone walking through the desert, right? It's like a sponge always seeking water. It's the yearning of the soul for happiness, for joy, for pleasure, for bliss. But we keep on looking in the wrong places in this world, and we think that this taco is going to do it, or the beach is going to do it, or this material sense object, or watch some TV show, or whatever it is, this relationship, this person, to kind of quench the soul. But the soul always, like water and oil, it's always something missing, right? Like rock. Were you going to say something?
I have a question.
Yes.
Are you talking about the soul in the sense of an individual soul, or are you talking about the soul in the sense of
super soul, the interconnected consciousness. I'm talking about the soul in the sense of the individual soul, but since you brought that subject up, it's a very important subject, right? Remember in the beginning I was talking about there's different lineages, and they have an interpretation on what is matter, what is the divine, and what is the self. And there's different philosophical schools that have different interpretations on that same truth. One of the original authors of the Vedas say, Vedanti Tattva Vedasya Jnanam Brahmamadvayam Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavaniti Shabdite, says that one undivisible supreme absolute truth has three different ways of explaining or understanding it. So there's some philosophies will say that you and me, God, her, this tree, this separation between us is an illusion. This is not true. And the fact that we identify as separate from all things is the cause of all suffering, is the cause of all bondage, is the cause of all thing. And enlightenment is realizing, is merging, is realizing that thing gets disappeared. And in one angle, this is true, right? This is called, we would say, abed, or non-difference, non-duality. This has a certain truth to it. There's other schools, which is Dvaitavad, which says, you idiot, how can you say that the leaf and me is the same thing? How can you say that there's no difference between inert matter and consciousness? How can you say that there's no difference between God and the living entity, right? There's a factual difference between things, and understanding what those differences are is where empowerment comes from. Then this is called Dvaitavad. So first one was Advaitavad, second one's Advaitavad. You don't have to remember the Sanskrit, really, just the ideas. And then the other one is like Vishishta Dvaitavad, that says really we're all one, but there's certain qualities that shade that oneness. Like this leaf, for example. This leaf is one leaf. It's one thing, but there's the brown spots and there's the yellow spots. And the yellow is an attribute that is connected to the leaf. So yellowness exists within the leaf, but there exists a leaf. Last week there was one of these jungle animals, like this big, kind of like rodent, interesting thing. So I was like, is it a jaguar? And no, it's a doggy. Right. Very good. So another philosophy is that the living entity is like an attribute or a coloration that exists on the divine. But each one of these ideas have certain limitations, but are still also true. What our gurus teach us is what's called Achincha Veda Veda Tattva. That Achincha means inconceivable, means that our material intellect is the wrong tool for understanding eternal reality, divine reality. So we're never going to fully capture it in a metaphor, and we're never fully going to be able to intellectualize it or write it down in a book. It's something that realized knowledge that I explained before. So it's inconceivable, oneness and difference simultaneously. Simultaneously, from one angle of vision, you can say there's complete difference. And another angle of vision, you can say it's all Shakti Parinamavad, or it's all a transformation of the same energy. It's all a transformation of the same energy. And they both exist simultaneously, which can get confusing because it's supposed to be.
My question always comes back to, after you sort of ask the what,
Yes.
why?
Okay, this is a good one. So inconceivable oneness and difference, before I answer the question of why, right, is our lineage stresses difference more than oneness, because indifference allows there to be a lover and beloved. And that allows rasa, or ananda, or bliss, or that happiness to come forth. But talking about the why is going to make it a little bit more sense to what I'm saying. So, if this existed in time, which it doesn't, we would say once upon a time, but it's outside of material time. But once upon a time, there was reality, right? There was God, there was existence. And that one supreme Advaya Gyan Parata, that one supreme original absolute truth, you could say got bored. He was everything, he, she, it, right? metaphorically, we generally just say he out of culture, but really genderless in a sense, right? But he was there and existing and perfectly enlightened and realized no suffering, no differentiation, no universes, no planets, no everything, just like an energy, like some would say like a white light, a nirvana, a nothingness or a oneness, a Brahma Jyoti, a white kind of nothing existence light, right? Then he got kind of bored. It was like, it'd be kind of nice to have some fun, right? So then Radha Krishna Achi Lila Aswatira Dwarup, that one being manifested into two separate forms in order to have some fun, in order to taste rasa. That's why the ancient scriptures describe the supreme absolute truth as raso vaisaha. The dharma or the purpose of the absolute is to taste every type of happiness that exists, every type of bliss, every type of pleasure, every type of taco, every type of ice cream, any bit of happiness that can exist is job to taste that.
But
So
sadness, right?
what?
Also the sadness.
Also the sadness, yeah, but it's not good marketing, so we don't talk about that one as much, right? But for there to be happiness, there must be sadness. Otherwise, there's no contrast, and happiness doesn't mean anything. There has to be a difficulty, there has to be suffering in order. So whenever there is a separation of existence, lover and beloved divided into two, then there's a magnetic attraction to merge, to come together as one. And in that journey is where you have the whole movie, is where you have the hero trying to meet the heroine in the tension, in the sadness, makes the meeting very beautiful. So there's also that suffering, and we'll get there more. This is an advanced class, because it's asking advanced questions, right? So we're going. So this division, the one supreme being that got bored, no suffering, right? But bored, divides into two, into the masculine and feminine aspect of the divine, right? So when we say, like we say, she was singing before, Radha, Ramana. Radha is the feminine aspect of divine, Ramana is the masculine aspect of divine love play. But each of them have a purpose, the masculine and the feminine aspect of the divine. And you could say, if we're getting philosophical, all color, all dimension, all shape, all physicality, all existence is manifested from the feminine aspect of the design. It's all the divine. It's like all a transformation of the feminine energy. And the masculine aspect of the divine is the consciousness, is the awareness, is the observer. So the feminine is the observed, and the masculine is the observer aspect of the divine, right? So you have this masculine and this feminine, this many names. Om, actually the mantra Om is the A stands for the masculine, U for the feminine, Ma, the living entity connected, is the union of the masculine and the feminine. This Om, you've heard Om before, right? This Omkara, this mantra, very, very, very deep. So, but we like to say Radha for the feminine and Krishna for the masculine. Krishna means the all attractive, beautiful. So now, the masculine aspect of the divine is desiring, is wanting to have all of this rasa, all of this lila, all of this fun. And the feminine aspect of the divine, which is the power. This is why they talk about Shakti, or the female power. Power and female energy is the same word in Sanskrit. Shakti and Shaktiman, and the possessor of power. Then Shakti goes and creates all of the universe, all of reality, all of the different planets, all of everything in existence. If you look out into the Milky Way, you see there's millions and millions and millions of galaxies, and this is just physical stuff you can see with the telescope. You think of states of consciousness and beings. Reality is infinitely more great than we can fathom with our little mind. Like if you think of a little bacteria on the end of this thing, how can they actually fathom what's going on in Tulum? No idea. You know, no idea to be able to know all of this that's going on. So we're also limited by what's going on in all of reality. And everything is a different game or a different rasa, different relationship between Radha and Krishna. Also, as part of that, then you could say, well, where's us, right? Where does the living entities fit into that living thing? And to get more philosophical, since we're going in, we're known as something which is called Bibinangsa Tattva, or part and parcels of the Supreme. So on one level, you can say we're a small fragment of the masculine part of the divine. The example is given, like we have the same quality, but a different quantity. So the quality is is, how do you say, like ocean water. You can take one drop from the ocean. It's the same quality, same salt, same wetness and everything. But then you have the big ocean is infinitely greater and more capable. So we're like, I want to be happy, right? I have all these desires because we're like a fragment, a bibinungsa of the masculine aspect of the divine. We're like, okay, well, how can I make myself happy? I'm going to go get tacos, I guess is the example of this class, or I'm going to go to Tulum, or I'm going to do whatever it is that makes me happy. But our ability to be able to manifest that and our ability to be able to experience that is very fragmented compared to God of all gods, that is everything in existence, right? So in one aspect we can say we're masculine, but in another aspect you can say we're also feminine aspect of divine. It's called the Jiva Shakti, right? And this is one of those inconceivable things where the Maya, or the illusion, the delusion that binds us to this world, is us thinking that, what I call in my book, God syndrome, that everything is meant for my pleasure. That I'm the center of the universe, everything is meant for me, I'm meant to be happy, everything is going to satisfy my senses and my desires and go the way that things I want, and that is the problem. I mean, if you think of all, like even just on a material level, all environmental disasters, all wars, all murders, all bad things that have happened, is people seeking power, seeking control, seeking to try to be the dominant force and God, and have everything be about them and satisfy their own desires. This is a problem, right? So our nature, our tendency, in an eternal perspective, is feminine in the sense of loving and serving the masculine aspect of divine. And the process of bhakti is igniting that relationship or that serving. The ego doesn't like to hear it. I want to be the master, right? It's easy to say, oh, you are many gods. Yeah, many gods, right? but that's kind of cause. How does the masculine serve the feminine? This is also very interesting discussion. In this context.
It sounds like the feminine is, I almost, to borrow from Taoism, it's like one can see beauty as beauty only because there is ugliness.
Yes.
And it's almost like through this unity, there's like these things get pulled apart.
Yeah.
And that is what reality is like all the things in between.
Yes.
And if consciousness is a blip inside of that in between, and the feminine is serving the masculine through all of this that exists, how does the masculine, our consciousness, serve the feminine in existence?
Okay. When we understand that we're not the subject, that it's not about us, right? The real thing that matters is the love play between, you can say, God and his girlfriend, right? The masculine, the feminine, and that. Then our relationship comes as a servant or as a facilitator of that relationship.
Yes.
To try to serve and facilitate that relationship, and in doing so, in the connection of that automatically brings us so much happiness.
But what is that? What is that service?
Let's go into more depth here. Deep questions. We're going very deep. Normally in this kind of class I wouldn't go this deep. You wanted to say something?
I was thinking, like, isn't it context driven? Isn't it perception? Like how like we manifest that service is dependent on the consciousness in ways. I don't know. I was just
Okay. So I'm trying to make it, and like, it's a lot to take in, right? It's a lot to put in. Remember we spoke about sampradayas, different schools of thoughts, right? One angle is saying, okay, the philosophy of the difference between matter and consciousness, and like we described as the differentiation. But in the Eastern traditions, the different sampradayas have a deeper purpose that accentuate different types of relationship with the divine. So we understand that just as every snowflake is completely different, every grain of sand is, I don't know if every grain of sand is different, but like there's so much, how do you say, diversity in reality, that the whole purpose of our existence is also diverse. In other words, we have a unique relationship with God that cannot be replicated, right? That we have a svarup, an internal personal relationship. And in the conditioned sense, we have no idea what that is, and we're bound just like I've been describing in this world. But in the pure realized sense, then we have a specific service and a specific relationship that only we have. And spiritual life is knowing and realizing that. And But there are different categories of relationships, you can say. And those different categories of relationships, there'll be different groups, which are groups of souls, in a sense, that are more inclined to relationship in a different way, to a different type of unique relationship, like different groups of relationships. And I'll go over those right now to make it more concrete, right? So this, what I'm talking about, is something called rasa tattva. Tattva means philosophical truth or conclusions, and tattva siddhanta means like what is the objective kind of mathematical logic, and that's what we were talking about before. And from that perspective of philosophy, you would say that our job is to be a servant of God, and it's not about our desires, but it's about the desires of the Supreme, knowing what that desire is, being in service of that desires. You may know that through a guru or through intuition, being able to tune in, and there's that pulsating desire that's guiding everything and tuning into that and serving that. But ultimately, you have to transcend beyond this material body and consciousness to be able to serve that desire in some way. Philosophically, that's true. But that's the boring side of it. That's the boring side. The beautiful side is the rasa side. And that's the side of relationship. And it's the philosophy, I guess you can say philosophy, right? The philosophy of different types of relationship. This is broken down into, I guess you can say, 3 different categories, even though they're generally not used in 3 different ways. One category is the category of shanta. And this is the category of indifference. This is the category of a lot of traditions, spirituality, like I was in modern spirituality, is of just not being against God, right? Not trying to take it for yourself, just realizing and being in that impersonal nothingness. It's not an active service necessarily, but it's not an active competition with God. Like, let's say the apple that exists, and we think, well, it's either for God's pleasure or for my pleasure. Well, screw you, God, it's for me, right? Then you're in a competition with God. But in a sense, it's like saying, I don't need anything, I'm nothing, I don't need an apple, I'm completely happy in and of myself, who I am. And that's one type of relationship. Little boring. But that's the Brahman, Nirvana, oneness, realization, liberation. The next type of relationship is called Aishwarya. And this is understanding God in all of his power, all of his glory, all of his super godliness. He's sometimes the God that's going to judge you, that's sitting in the clouds, that will send you to hell if you don't do what he wants. And you're like, oh my gosh, well, I respect the king because he has all this money, but God is the king of the king, and he has even more money, and he has even more power, and he's simply Sutramaniga Gunaiva. Describe that all of the universes come into existence and are situated and floating in the sky, and everything is coming all into existence simply by the will of God, and he doesn't even have to blink an eye or do any type of work or any type of anything to be able to create, sustain, destroy, and make everything happen in existence. Every blade of grass is moving according to his will. Everything is happening in perfect synchronicity. The planets, the sun, the moon, the ecosystems, everything, biological process is all happening by the power and the will of God. So therefore, God is a very powerful person, and we've got to say we're not worthy. We've got to respect you, right? And do that. Lots of religions do this. Like in Islam, bowing down to God like this. In Hinduism, sometimes there's these very big elaborate ceremonies of big offerings and worship and respect like that, and treating like the King of Kings or God. Many religions, and this is also good in a lot of ways, right? Then there is the secret, and that's where you have relationship with God that is beyond and more important than the fact that God is God. It's sweeter than that. Hold with me. Think of, let's say, a king, right? The king is the king. He's there in court. Everyone's coming down and saying, you're the best. And he's like, I'm the best, or whatever. Everyone's loving him. Everyone's like, for him being the king. But he goes home, and his mother is like, you're my little boy. Right? Yeah, king, schming. I don't care if you're the king, right? You gotta eat your broccoli, right? This sweetness of the mother telling the king to eat broccoli, there's a nectar in that. There's something really heart-touching and beautiful about that has nothing to do with the fact that he's the king. Nothing to do with the fact. It's just that love. It's like, even when I said it now, I saw you guys sparkle a little bit. Just the thoughts of that relationship is better than wealth and majesty and godliness. It's better than just being like, I don't attack you and I don't fight you, right? That's called rasa. And these rasas, we believe exist because if they exist in this world, by definition, they must exist in the origin of it all, in God. So in this world, if a mother can love a child beyond any type of material wealth or designation, and that love is more beautiful and more sweet than these other things, then that has to originate in God by definition. Has to, otherwise then that God is incomplete. Otherwise we have an experience and can do something that God can't, and then he's not God, right? So these relationship is beyond the fact that God's God, and it's a very familial type of relationship. These relationships are 5 rasas. One of them already described indifference, like not non-attacking. Then there is dasya, the idea of servant, that I'm your servant and I'm a servant for you. Then higher than that, more familial relationship is that of vatsalya, which I was describing before as parental type relationship, is saying that God is now my baby. I'm taking care. And if I don't take care properly, he's going to grow up to be a bad boy. I have to nourish, I've got to protect. And the love is so powerful that God is completely bound by this love. Completely bound. I remember my Gurudev giving class about what is powerful enough to be able to bind the unbindable supreme absolute being, the supreme origin. Only bhakti, love, relationship of the heart can come close. Otherwise, nothing can bound or control God. And this also takes envy away from a heart, that if we can control God with love, then that's beautiful, right? Then even deeper, Vatsalya was before Vatsalya was Sakya, or friendship. That's like equalness. Say, you're my friend, you and me are equal. We have a friendship type, we're bros, we're buddies, right? Relationship with the divine. Then the highest type of relationship, what? Sorry? Okay. The highest is called madhurya. Madhu literally means honey, but this is the romantic relationship with God, that God could be my beloved, and my lover, and my being. So we understand that in the beginning we have Radha and Krishna, masculine or feminine and masculine aspect of the divine. So Srimati Radhika is the feminine, and she is Sarvakanti Shiramani. She is the origin of all love, of all beauty, of all sweetness exists in her. And that her love, even though God is the creator and the doer and the masculine of all things, but he becomes a servant to her. He comes completely bound by her love and relationship. And we can also have a similar type mood. One type of mood is we can have a direct loving relationship with God, or we can be the servant of Srimati Radhika. We can be Radha's servant. We can be like her close, near and dear friend, and help in the relationship between Radha and Krishna. And this is very, very high. There's one deepest part of the philosophy, deepest part, is once upon a time Shri Krishna, he's sitting with Shri Radha, and he sees that she's completely maddened in love and has so much happiness and sweetness that he's thinking, I cannot understand the joy that she's feeling. What is it that in serving and in loving me, in taking on that aspect of the relationship, she's feeling more joy, more bliss, and more happiness than I'm feeling myself. So then Shri Krishna says, but I'm gonna have to taste everything, right? So then he comes in the form of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, another, I guess you could say God in India, who is God in the form of a servant. And he does kirtan, and he does serving, and takes on those feminine, masculine body, but takes on those feminine qualities of what happiness is there in being a servant of God, in seeing God as a beloved and a relationship, and taste all those types of sweetness and rasa. So in our specific lineage or sampradaya, that's this particular type of relationship or mood of our spiritual life, is how to serve that relationship between Radha and Krishna and taste on those moods. And that's the ananda, what we understand to be the highest expression of the pleasure potency of the soul. Very, very deep. We're talking about completely binding God in love. Completely. And this is rasa, this is lila. This is not a cheap thing. Not a cheap thing. They say Shruti Mitare Smriti Mitare Ahamidam Nande Yasalinde Parabrahma. That there's many philosophers that sometimes they do these deep austerities to be able to control the body and mind. They'll light fires all around them, being in the desert, in the hot, hot summer, without drinking anything, just be able to tolerate it and cultivate the state of consciousness so nothing can happen. Some of them will cultivate so they can just like submerge themselves in ice water forever and be able to do these things. There's so many people who do so many different pilgrimages and difficult spiritual processes, and there's so many people who spend decades and decades trying to read the books and understand what's the nature of divine, but I don't care for all of this. I know that the supreme absolute truth is the son of Nanda Baba. He's a small little boy that he cannot turn over unless his mother helps to turn over, and is a beautiful, beautiful, sweet being. There's one story. The author of the Vedas, his name was Vyasadeva. So in the beginning, remember the big books, the Vedic literature that I was speaking about, so much deep, deep, deep philosophy. He wrote the Vedas, right? Yeah, sorry, there's like 3 stories, I'm trying to pick which one to tell you. Sukadev Goswami was Barhapitam Natavarapu Karniyo Karnikaram, right? So, the author of the Vedas, Vyasadeva, he had a son. And this son was born enlightened. They say he stayed in the womb for 16 years. And for 16 years in the womb, he's like, I don't want to go out into the material nature. I don't want this Maya, this illusion. I'm just going to stay in here and do my spiritual practices. After 16 years, oh, please, get born. Your mother's having a tough time. Right? He's like, okay. Then he appeared, and he was naked, but like a 16-year-old boy. And he said, I'm not attached to family. I'm not attached to friends. I'm not attached to anything of this material nature. I'm just completely absorbed in spiritual consciousness. And he walks into the forest. And he goes there naked, nothing, completely enlightened, like this. And he is that Brahman realized, not identifying with body, not identifying with mind, not covered by illusionary energy, that enlightened state which everyone wants to be. And but his father wanted him to come to teach him some more aspects of the Vedas. So his father brought some hunters from the forest and said, you chant these 2 verses, and these verses will attract my son to come, and then I can teach him some more of the Vedic literature, right? So the first verse was Parhapidam Natravapu Karnayo Karnikaram Ribarvasa Kanakakapisham Vajayantim Chamalam Nandan Vedo Adara Sudha Puriyam Gopavindad Vrindaranan Supadaramanam Prabhishat Gita Kirti. It's a description of Krishna. Saying Parhapidam, Krishna, he lives in Vrindavan, very beautiful forest, taking care of cows like a coward. Every day he leaves with his friends to go to the forest and take care of the cows. But he's dressed like a very beautiful dancer. With his body is darkish black. It's described he's the color of a rain cloud, and his clothes are yellow like a lightning bolt on a rain cloud. So very, very beautiful. And he's on his head. He has a karnika flower behind his ear, very long, beautiful hair. He's going into the forest playing his flute, and all of the cowboys are playing different drums and different beautiful musical procession. And as he goes, then all the residents are coming on the line and waiting, watching him leave. And it's this huge celebration and this huge procession. He's wearing a beautiful garland around his neck made of forest flowers. You know how does he get this forest flowers? Must be that the gopis, his beloveds, his girlfriends in Vrindavan, made this flower garland from him, picked it, and gave him to her. It's beautiful. He's taking the nectar of his lips and putting it inside of the flute, playing beautiful music. And they just say the description of Om is actually this flute playing from Krishna. It is the sound of Om. And in that mantra, Krishna is playing the name of each of us, of each one of the soul, saying, come, come. We can't hear because we're hearing stuff in this world. But if you're in meditation, you can hear that Om, that becomes real initiation, real spiritual life that makes us driven to go there. That's Brahma who created the universe. He was initiated through the flute of Krishna, like this. So he's putting beautiful nectar inside the flute, inside the flute, and they're playing beautiful Pravishad Gita Kirtan. This is how he's entering into the forest. So the author of all of the Vedas, these libraries of the most complex type of philosophy where they take 1 second and cut it up into thousands of pieces, Shruti Ugayate, right? Shruti is cut into thousands of cycles and then measure time in 400,000 year increments and in yugas and get like so deep about every facet of existence described in ancient Vedas. Amazing intellectual knowledge. He's saying this verse, you call, because he might be enlightened, but we want to be able to attract the heart with the beauty. Someone asked, again, the guru of my guru, they said, what would you do if I don't believe that there's any Krishna? He said, simply open your mind to anything that is beautiful, because by definition, all that beauty exists in the divine, and that's the most important quality. It's described that Krishna, God, the divine, has 64 qualities, but the main quality is Rupa Madhuri, is the beauty of that being. It's kind of like the trunk of the tree, and all the other ones are branches coming from that tree of beauty or attractiveness. So even the most enlightened beings like Sukadeva Goswami, who was born 16 years old, completely detached from anything, then his mind, oh, there's something more. There's some ananda, there's some bliss, there's something more to spiritual life than just something sparked inside of his whole soul. Then he came and was able to learn the rest of the Vedas. Also, another story of the author of the Vedas, Vyasadeva. He wrote all this Vedic literature, all these Vedic scriptures, and he wasn't happy. He was very sad. He was sad, and his guru, Narad, came to him and said, why are you so sad? And he said, I don't know why I'm that sad. You're the guru. You're supposed to tell me these things. Why am I so sad? And he said, you're so sad because you talked about all the external aspects of spiritual life. You talked about karma, how to live in the world morally, how to be a proper family person, how to take care of your family and kids, what's your duty towards society, what's moral living. You talked about Gyan, you talked about all philosophical truths about Sankhya Yoga, about the different elements and the nature of how reality works, and all intellectualization, all this philosophical stuff, right? You talked about yoga, you talked about using energies and mysticism to be able to do magic in a sense and to activate alternate states of being. You talked about all of these things in material. You talked about how to, they talk about Dharma, Artha, Gyan, Moksha. I'm going to put my shirt on. But they say that there's 4 purposes of the Vedas, or the Vedic literature. Dharma, which is moral living. How does one live in society in a proper way? What is the duty of a student? What's the duty of a married person, of a family person? What's the duty of a parent? Then Artha, how do you make money? How do you get rich? How do you have a moralistic, proper way of creating your livelihood, right? Artha Shastra, how should a king conduct himself and his wealth and his finances? How should someone else in a different status of society do the same? By the different propensities of human nature. Kama, talked about all the desires that we have, all our lust, Kama Sutra, all these. You go to a Konark temple in India, there's one temple, they have carved sculptures on the whole side of the temple, huge thing out of rocks, like that, and it's just all these sex positions all over the thing. It freaks Westerners and Indians out, freaks a lot of people out, right? But it talks all about sexuality, and that in all of its permutations and all of its evolutions, about how to give one pleasure. Talks about how to, but in the Kama Sutras is also how do you get pleasure from food, how do you get pleasure from relationships, how do you get pleasure from touch, from all sorts of things, also described in the Vedas. Then it talks about moksha, which is how do you destroy suffering, how do you liberate yourself from all the bindings and complexities of this world. So this is the enlightenment, then being present, liberation from suffering. Is that so? The Vedas, you wrote so many books about all of these things, but have you talked about how Krishna is completely bound by the love of his beloved? Have you talked about how Mother is taking care and chastising Krishna, saying you've been a naughty boy, and holding a stick saying if you don't eat your vegetables, you're going to be in trouble? We talked about all these beautiful sweetness. You haven't, so therefore you cannot be happy. You can only be happy when you go to the true essence, the secret. So then he wrote Vedartha Paribhrimataha. Maybe you've heard of Vedanta Sutra? No? Okay. So the Vedas huge libraries big, right? Then these libraries big, it gets very confusing. So then it's condensed down into something which is called sutras, which are these one-line phrases that encapsulate the nature of reality. And it's like 550 sutras, Vedanta Sutra, very philosophical. One sutra you give class for a long, long time, right? And then each lineage has an interpretation, an explanation of these sutras, and it's very intellectual, and has a commentary. But the Srimad Bhagavatam is Vedartha Paribrimata, is the natural commentary on these sutras, so the essence of Vedic scriptures. And in the Srimad Bhagavatam is talking about all these beautiful things that I'm speaking about, the beauty, the qualities, the relationship of the divine of Sri Krishna. It's the highest, deepest. And when we talk about what could be more beautiful than this? There's so much, maybe in your spiritual life, sometimes you can go into meditation and you can have this experience of nothingness, an experience of oneness where you're just happy. There's no suffering. And just being you is just peaceful. And like all the pain goes away and you're just good and you're happy and you're just present in and of yourself and you need nothing from anyone. You don't need anything. You're just consciousness and happy. This is like broken pieces of glass compared to diamonds, compared to Chintamani touchstones of the love of bhakti, of Sri Krishna, this rasa. And then in this rasa, then there's also the pain. And that's the pain of separation, the heart longing to be connected with the divine. And there's called viraha and milan. Rasa has two aspects. Milan is relationship, is when Radha and Krishna are together, when we're meeting with the divine. Nayone nayone tava, described in one of the songs. Amito tomar tu mito amar ki kacha paradhane. I want to see you eye to eye, face to face, right? I'm yours, you are mine. Very beautiful situation, right? Milan, together. And in a sense, you can say that this is the goal or the striving to unite with God in loving relationship. But then there's another aspect which is called viraha, and that's separation, not staying together. Raha means to be situated close. Viraha means not being situated close. This is separation. So meeting happens, and then there's separation. And in that separation, so much pain is there. But that pain is like a happy pain. It's hard to describe. I've had small experience of that, crying your eyes out, crying, but the most beautiful thing you can ever experience, right? Not the pain of illusion or bondage in this world. So Radha Krishna coming together, going separate, prema vivarta, and all different stages in between. And in every level of closeness and separateness, there's a different relationship, a different rasa, a different nectar to be experienced. And it's described like a big ocean. And this relationship takes the shape of many different moods, right? Many different flavors. And sometimes one mood comes, sometimes it goes down, sometimes another mood comes. And just drowning in this ocean of rasa is understood. Conclusion of all Vedas to be the highest attainment of existence and the point of it all. If you don't have this rasa, this ocean of nectar, of relationships and love, then you don't have relationship. Then if you don't have relationship, then there's no need for separate existence. Because separate existence is to have a lover and beloved. If there's no separate existence, then everything is one. Then you have oneness. And if everything is one, then why is there separateness? Why? Why does this have to exist? Why is there existence in the first place? The only reason for there to be existence is to facilitate love. It's all about love and a big love play. Then why are we somehow bereft of that loving relationship? Why are we conditioned in this world with our God syndrome and our suffering? That's a long conversation. Simple answer is that's also another game, right? Our process of spiritual life, our process of growing is this unique experience that has to exist in existence. And we get to go through that, of being so far away and then being able to go through all the struggles to come to true loving relationship. That journey is a magical journey. If it didn't exist, reality would be incomplete. So we get to have a complete reality and go through that part right now. With its suffering, but there's always suffering of some sort. But that suffering, if that suffering leads to a pleasure, then is it suffering? Maybe, maybe not. Like if you're on a plane flying to Tulum from somewhere else, it's not the funnest experience, but it's worth it because now you're landing in Tulum. It becomes part of the trip. If you're going through that long trek and it was so difficult, then you have the memory of all the difficulty and then how at the end there was this cenote or this pool and you jump and you swam into it and how good that felt. If you were hot, then now when you're showering in the cold water, it feels good. It's that contrast, right? Any other thoughts or questions? I never spoke this deep in Monk Club. Nor will you say philosophical.
I was just gonna ask you the deepest question.
What was
I
that?
was gonna ask you, what is your life's purpose?
My life's purpose. I wrote a whole book on that actually. Dharma is about purpose, right? It is about purpose. So considering that I get into that one, into some detail, there's different levels of purpose, right? One purpose is like the purpose, dharma means nature, or like an inherent constitutional function of anything that exists. So the purpose of this finger is to be able to bend this way. If it bends that way, it's going against its purpose, going against its nature. So to the degree that I'm limited by my body and my mind, then my body and my mind also has specific purposes, which are good. And coming into alignment with that, I mean, the whole Vedic philosophy is how do we align our body, how do we align our mind, how do we align everything to be supportive of spiritual growth, but still taken care of along the way, like a holistic being, right? That's why you have the money, the exercise, the sex, the different aspects. So I could tell you about my material purposes, but that's not so interesting. I can tell you after, we can talk, right? Maybe after the class, no problem. I'm not hiding anything, but that's not the point. But then there's the purpose of the Atma, of the soul, right? And that purpose is to find that loving relationship with the divine. Now we all have that as a purpose. Some people may have accepted and living according to that nature, some people not, right? I'm trying to. And as we advance more, then what that exactly means becomes more defined and more fixed. So in our lineage, we're Shaktas, where we actually love the feminine aspect of the divine more than the masculine. We're on her side, on Radha's side, on Krishna's side, right? So our purpose is to serve her, to make her happy, and do what she wants in the service of Krishna. That's highest purpose. Radha Dasya, not a light term.
Say that one more time.
Radha Dasya,
Radha Dasya.
to be the servant, the maid servant of Srimati Radhika. Nothing, highest purpose. Highest. They become Tadatma, like one in heart with Srimati Radhika.
Would you say that everyone's purpose is to eventually come back to that union?
Yeah. What's the purpose of life or existence? Like, why are we all here, right? Is to grow spiritually and then,
I guess
yeah.
my what I'm getting at is we were created because there needed to be something to be created, because there was boredom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, in that sense, would you say that all things that could happen have to happen?
All things that could happen have to. Yeah.
So in that sense, it doesn't matter what you do, because everything has to happen.
Yes, but not everything's your responsibility.
No.
No, and not everything is your. You shouldn't try to have everything happen, right? It's
No,
like
I'm not saying that.
yeah.
But you are.
It doesn't.
You have to. You're a piece. Like you're 0.00001%,
Yeah.
if you will, like of
Yeah.
the entire thing, of all the possible things
Uh-huh.
that could happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter which one of those 0.0001 pieces you are, because whatever one you are, it has to be there.
Yes, but that thing still has a purpose to evolve in a specific way.
Right.
Right. So it's not that. I think you understand that, right? It's like we all each have an individual purpose, and it's all equally valid and equally important. And where we are, there's not like this guilt shaming of you're bad or you're wrong or like that, and it's like completely accepting where we are. However, there is healthy actions and unhealthy actions. There are, how do you say, karma. There is a reactions to what we do, and we can make choices which are adharmic or that go against, how do you say, cosmic morality, in a sense, that are not good for our spiritual growth, and in some ways backtracking.
This is a silly question, but do you believe in the context of this, do you believe in free will?
Well, that's a deep question. Yes, I do. But it's not as easy as it's deep. It's a longer conversation.
It is. This is something that I struggle with, because I'm at this point existentially where it's like, if all things that could happen have to happen, and I'm one of those pieces, does that mean that I'm on that lifeline? Or do I have the ability to say, well, I want to move between the lifelines?
Yeah.
You know?
Okay. Yeah, I've thought of this one a lot.
Yeah.
Right? It's okay. Good way of explaining it. Free will, free will. Our free will is limited into being Krishna Bahirmukh or Onmukh. Unmukh or Bahirmukh. Mukh means face, and like something like where are you facing. So we have the choice of, I can choose to look towards God, to look towards spirituality, enlightenment. Another way of saying that is I can choose to make it not about me, selfish, to be selfless, or I can choose to be selfish, look away from God, and just satisfy myself. I can choose right now for my gratification or for God's gratification. That's pretty much the level of choice that we have. Once we've made that choice in every moment, then how that choice manifests is we have a lot less choice, in a sense. So if I say I want to enjoy right now, I might think that I get to choose how to define enjoyment, but just the fact that I'm born as a heterosexual male, which is my birth, I'm attracted to women. And my genetic composition has a specific type of women that I'm attracted to. Some I'm attracted to, some I'm not. I'm attracted to fertility, which means health and youth, right? And there's certain other things that I'm attracted to. Just because of the fact of what I grew up eating, I have certain tastes of certain types of food that I'm attracted to. So there's all these other forces that are now conditioning how I choose to try to gratify myself, which in one sense you can say I have a little bit of control over, because I'm conditioned in that being. On a bigger perspective, we say that our conditioning is our karma, and our subtle body, it goes to a lot more detail than just like, being heterosexual or homosexual or man or woman, right? It goes a lot deeper into like all these details of our life. But as soon as we look away from God, mostly we're just reacting to karmic influences and other influences of nature. However, so in one sense you could say we have no choice in that situation. Also, we have no choice of like, we're right now choosing a certain experience to be here in this conversation. But we can't, if it's all of a sudden starts thundering down on rain with us, then we can't control that, right? So our power is very limited. If a tidal wave comes, our power is very limited in one sense. However, even in that limited context of our what's called samskars, which means impressions that are left in us for what we're attracted to, what we like, and our karma, which is all the good and bad kind of like money points that we have that enable a certain type of existence, we also have some power. Because by nature, we are mini gods, quote unquote, right? The part and parcel. We have that same quality of independence and that quality of free will. And according to our previous karma, and according to our state of consciousness, which is another discussion we're not getting into, I have some power, choice, to pick this up or to not pick this up, to pick this up or to not pick this up. I have limited choice right now. I have limited choice of what I'm doing or thinking. I don't have full control, right? I chose to do an example, and that happened to be there, so this was good for my example. I couldn't have chosen something else. I couldn't have chose to make it a knife because I don't have a knife here, right? So I'm limited according to my sphere of influence, but I have a small sphere of influence. And the choices that I make on that small sphere of influence either expands my sphere of influence or contracts that sphere of influence, or just creates a different experience, maybe not expanding or contract, just a different. So our choices, we do have a certain power to navigate our life and to make choices about what we eat, what we don't eat, what we do, but that power is still limited in some senses, and some senses we actually have a lot of power, and depending on our state of consciousness and how we choose to use our energy can affect how much power we have in a material sense. But still, in a great context, that's still so little power. It's still very little. You were going to say something? No? Then on the spiritual side of things is, okay, then we can choose to love, to be separate. Like you guys made a choice, a spiritual choice to be here in this class. How much can you bind God with your love right now? I don't think so. If you can, let me know. Right? I need the blessings, right? But it's so your spiritual growth is also limited, but you made a choice to do some step in your spiritual life. And hopefully from this class and from this, at least philosophically, by hearing and by listening to this and doing the kirtans, it is a spiritual process. So that's raised the qualification or the adhikar, the level. You've kind of leveled up in your heart, and that expands your spiritual capacity to be able to love more. And then we expand it more, love more to be able to eventually be able to control God. So we have some power. We have the power to choose God, not choose God. And then within each one of those choices, we have the power to steer those a little bit. But we're still also running on conditioning. There's still also other things that factors in the equation of the control. And then on a spiritual sense, on the spiritual side of things, more completely, the beauty of the loving relationship that we have with God is our free will, our independence, our free will, that we can choose to love in a specific way. So God can say, I want it this way. You say, no, you don't get it that way, you get it this way. But it's still love and giving. And then that's where there's even more sweetness, and that's we're trying to raise.
Would you almost say that when you get to that point where you're turning the baby over,
Yeah.
that's what modern spirituality calls like manifestation, where it's like you're giving it this way, but actually I want it to be this way, or controlling God in that sense. Or am I misconceiving?
I wouldn't say it that way. I would say manifestation is still in the material realm of things,
Yes.
but it's a higher state of consciousness. So what we didn't talk about was states of consciousness, right? So there's maybe the modes of material nature, guna, sattva, raja, tama. Right?
I guess my question is like, what does controlling God mean to you?
I don't think we need to explain that. When you're there, then you can that's
Yeah.
we don't want to cheapen the idea, right? Not everything is explaining.
I understand.
Bound by love, though. The goal is not to control
No,
God.
of course.
The goal is love, and it has that much power that God is controlled by that love. But rather than thinking of controlling God, we think, how can we control ourselves? Right? Not so easy either. Not easy at all, right? And love.
But I have a question now with
Yes.
the free will and the love. For example, the example that you gave about the king that we perceive, the mom that is telling the king to eat broccoli, for example.
Yes.
It's not a free will of the king, maybe. But
So
you
you're
still
saying-
perceive it as love.
Yeah. So the king's free will has now been bound by the love of his mother. He's been subjugated. Maybe another king can come and capture him and put him in jail and force him to eat broccoli, or his mother can say, eat broccoli, right? And in jail, he's like, I'm a king, I will never eat your broccoli, right? Might never happen if it's someone who's doing it without love. But with his mother doing it, that's such a strong bond of the love of his mother that he has to. If there's real love. Unless messed up relationships, I don't know. But like, that's the beauty. Most powerful force in existence is love. More powerful than anything. It's the only thing that God wants and needs is love. And that exists in our soul. The only thing we need. Radha
is the
feminine.
feminine.
Yeah.
Wouldn't God, if he is to taste all things,
Yeah.
wouldn't he also become Radha?
So this is what I explained briefly before, very deep philosophy of Sri Chaitanya. He is the masculine. The servant. He takes on the mood of Radha, takes on the feminine qualities and the feminine sentiments, the bhav, Radha, to experience also. And then this is considered the highest form of God, like even higher than God by himself, because now it's together. But the coming together is now different than the unity that happened, that they were before separation. Now they separated and come together again to mingle as one, and then that's a much higher, because all this rasa happened in between. Then they separate again and mingle and separate and mingle, separate and mingle. Yes.
I'm interested, what is that separation? He explained this more. I'm interested as to why does it separate?
Why separation?
Why separation?
I mean, I gave the shorthand answers of without the suffering of separation, there's no sweetness in meeting, right? So there's a beauty in longing and desire and wanting, and the obstacles in the way is what makes it. Like if you're going to write a movie script,
You have to have tension.
you have to have the tension to have a resolution to that tension. And then when the tension is resolved, then the meeting is on a different dimension of higher, of sweetness.
But why is there a desire for sweetness?
Well, why is there existence,
Yes.
right?
That's my question.
Yeah. And I mean, one answer is it just is. Why is there existence, right? Without desire for sweetness, then there's no existence, right? But the fact that there is an existence is evidence that there is a desire for sweetness. Otherwise, there's no purpose or context or meaning or reason for existence. But there is existence because Tulum, right? So then we conclude that there is, right? that it is an eternal phenomenon in us. And thank God, except it wasn't, then that would be boring, right? It's hard for us to conceive of something that has always existed, that has always been there, and it's existed before time existed and outside of time. Very hard for the mind to understand eternality, right? It's outside of every experience that we've had, and that's what achintya, right? It's inconceivable beyond the intellectual mind. But maybe you've had some experience in meditation where it's like, wow, that was such a whole thing, and it was like 2 seconds, right? Like time changes, your relationship, your experience of time changes, and that. So it's also even described in the different planetary systems or different states of consciousness, your relationship with time speeds up and slows down and changes.
Very relative.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that what like Einstein's all about, right? Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts?
Where's the definition of consciousness being masculine coming from? Why is it this way?
Why
Not
masculine
why
is
is it not feminine?
I mean, masculine and feminine are English words, right? So, in one sense, it doesn't have anything to do with masculine and feminine or gender.
Yeah.
It's just, it's in a sense a metaphor for understanding reality. So I think culturally, like in the Taoist stuff you studied, it makes, if you look at the qualities of certain qualities of femininity and certain qualities of masculinity, it can make, it has resonance, but it's not that important because it's not a material gender. It's not a material.
There is something and there is the other thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And then there's the qualities that define those things, right? Any other questions? Okay. Very good. So,
Are you two together?
yes. So we will do more kirtan, and then she made some cake. So I'll have some chocolate cake.
Bliss.
Yeah. Fun. Okay, we're good. So what's kirtan you're going to say?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. It's a good one.
I like what?
I was just curious, like, are there different factions that have different kirtans?
Yes. I mean, kirtan's a whole world. Like for these programs, we just pick like some ones that's simple. In India, there's a lot of different mantras and languages and a lot of different ones. And generally, everyone, how do you say, likes them all, but has some ones they like more, right? A specific meaning. Like there's very few times, oh, I won't do that kirtan. However, in the different, if we do get into it a little bit, like we're talking about the different lineages of different philosophies. So there's some philosophies in India that like very much stress the many different gods, right? And they're going to do a kirtan worshiping one particular god, and like Ganesh or something, right? And Ganesh is like, oh, we worship Ganesh. Why? Because he gives us money, or whatever. And then in the bhakti thing, where we're not trying to make money, and that's not our interest in. We see the gods as managers of the universe. Like there's the god of the sun, he manages the sun. There's the god of the air that manages the air, and we're like, we like you, but we don't care about that. We want Krishna, Radha. We want the higher relation. It's described like there's the universe is managed by different people that are like branches and leaves on the tree, but the root is like the supreme absolute being. Like in Islam, they say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasul, like the no God but God, the one God, and then everyone is kind of like his servants. So we're like, we just want to do kirtan of that. So some people do, like Krishnadas will do some kirtan, and I'm like, why? Right? So yeah, there are different groups. Different parts of India will also have different styles of music, but that's more just cultural language and stuff. I like Radhe 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 Go. I like that one a lot. Yeah.
Can I ask what Govinda means?
Okay. Govinda is another name for Krishna, right? Go means senses, and Vinda means like the one who can satisfy all of that. So we have, in a sense, spiritual senses, and also many desires. The one can fully satisfy, can fully fulfill, and please all of those things is Govinda. Other meanings also, but that's basic meaning. You know Govinda?
I know Radhe Radhe Govinda Govinda Radhe.
Same, yeah. Radhe Govinda. It's also, there's different categories. If you're asking about kirtan, right, we can get more. There's Nam Kirtan, there's Guna Kirtan, there's Tattva Kirtan. There's different types of kirtan. And so this kirtan, which we call Nam Kirtan, is saying just the different names. Because by chanting the names, and that creates relationship, right? And but not all names are created equal. There's some names which is like Vishnu is actually my name, right? But Vishnu means like the all-pervasive being, master of us. Like it's a very God in his opulence and his all-pervasive, super awesome power, right? And then there's other names of like Govinda is Krishna in Vrindavan, who's a very personal, very relationship-oriented name. Another thing there's the gopis, which are the girlfriends of Krishna. So Govinda means the satisfier of the gopis, going to please the gopis. So there's that relationship there in Govinda, right? So it's a more personal name, Radhe Govinda, than like Jagannath, which can mean the Lord of the universe, the master, or something. So much more rasa, relationship oriented. Good. So what are you gonna sing?